Welcome to In But Not Of, a podcast dedicated to applying a Christian worldview to the study of history and culture. We're so glad that you could join us today. Welcome, everybody. We are going to do something a little different. So in the last several installments, we've been kind of looking at the counterculture and the concerts at Altamont, Woodstock, and more recently, the Travis Scott incident. But what I want to do is kind of take a detour and talk a little bit about a Netflix series called Midnight Mass. And I think it's important to do this because it's actually a rather popular and highly acclaimed series. And again, titled Midnight Mass, it's the latest installment from a director or producer named Mike Flanagan. Now, if you recognize that name, he was responsible for A Haunting of Hill House and Haunting of Bly Manor. And I will tell you that, in my opinion, he's pretty brilliant in the way that he tells the story. High quality, very good acting for the most part. The story keeps you hooked, and it's pretty much, as you look at it, it would be kind of the horror genre, but it's much deeper. So there's a lot of internal strife. There's a lot going on with the characters. There's deep-seated, plot lines that are really really keep you interested. And I just think it's of a high quality, really really well done. But what I want to do, I don't want to just, kind of offer a critique or a review so much of this Netflix series as talk about something that happens towards the end of Midnight Mass. And I want to do this with the idea that there'll be a little bit of a spoiler here. So if you're going to watch the series, I might give away some things that I'll try not to give away the entire thing, but try to give away. So, I'll give away some things just in the analysis and kind of response to the speech that the female character gives towards the end of the show. And I've entitled this episode "Midnight Mass: A Christian Response to Religious Tossed Salad." So just to give you a little bit of a background here, what's happened is that it's a story of a town that's located. I think it's on an island off the coast of Maine. It's a very small community. There's a Catholic church at the heart of this community, where an old established priest kind of was the priest of the island. He leaves, goes on a retreat or sabbatical of some kind. There's an illusion that he, may be a bit ill and maybe not be coming back when they thought he would. And a young priest kind of takes his place. Well, the priest is dynamic. Things start to happen on the island. There's miracles. There's unexplained things. It really is people. He really starts to impact people's lives on the island. There's all sorts of things going on in the characters' lives that are on the island that the priest deals with, from substance abuse to to somebody being responsible for a terrible accident that the individual's feeling guilty about. So all of this starts to culminate, and the priest is dealing with this. There's this whole mystery about what happened to the old priest, and then of course people's lives begin to be transformed and changed, but there's this dark, ominous thing happening the whole time where you get the sense that this is all leading to something. Something is just not quite right. And it's kind of the brilliance of the show that he's able to create this mood that happens. And so what I want to do before I get that far is kind of just talk about the scene that you're going to listen to. So one of the main characters, female, is lying here fighting for her life. And she kind of has a flashback thinking about a conversation she had with the main character, talking about what she believes happens when they die. Okay, so this is where I want to pick up. I'm going to play this brief clip. So he asks her, what happens when we die? And she's laying there kind of fighting for her life. She's bleeding out, and she flashes back to this conversation. So here's the first segment.
So what do you think happens when we die?
Speaking for myself?
Speaking for yourself. myself. Myself. That's the problem. That's the whole problem with the whole thing. That word, self. That's not the word. That's not right. That isn't. That isn't. How did I forget that? When did I forget that? The body stops a cell at a time, but the brain keeps firing those neurons. Little lightning bolts like fireworks inside, and I thought I'd despair or feel afraid, but I don't feel any of that. None of it. Because I'm too busy. I'm too busy in this moment, remembering. Of course. I remember that every atom in my body was forged in a star. This matter, this body is mostly just empty space after all, and solid matter is just energy vibrating very slowly, and there is no me. There never was. The electrons of my body mingle and dance with the electrons of the ground below me and the air. I'm no longer breathing. And I remember there is no point where any of that ends and I begin. I remember I am energy, not memory, not self. My name, my personality, my choices all came after me. I was before them and I will be after, and everything else is pictures, picked up along the way. Fleeting little dreamlets printed on the tissue of my dying brain. And I am the lightning that jumps between. I am the energy firing the neurons, and I'm returning.
Okay, certainly enough to talk about there. That's about half the speech. We'll look at what she says in the first half and kind of play the rest of it in a couple of moments here. But notice that it begins where she says, "Speaking for myself," when the other character asks her what happens when we die. Now, this was not a setup. At least it doesn't come across that way. So she starts by saying, "Speaking for myself," and then she begins to think about what her answer would be. But right from the outset, we see that the complete relativism of the response, that she chooses that complete relativist stance right away when the topic of religious discussion comes up, or this idea of what happens when we die. And this has been something that has happened over the centuries, actually, that slowly developed this idea that we cannot have objective knowledge when it comes to things like ethics and religion. That goes all the way back, since the well, you could argue it goes all the way back to the Garden of Eden, but certainly in the 19th century, when liberal theology and some of those other things that was happening in philosophy, the Kantian Gulf and some of the other things that kind of sprung up, this idea that you can't have real knowledge about things like the afterlife. It's just your opinion. And of course, there's the next extension of that, where there is even as an assumption by some people that your opinion translates to you making this reality. Now, she begins by arguing that from her perspective, there is no self. Now, she says this after she says, "Speaking for myself." So she says there's no self, and then she adds, "How did I forget that?" Now, the character, you'd have to ask at this point, she'd been attending church for, well, the whole series, anyways, from what you see during this point of her life, anyways. And it's almost like this is the first time she had had a thought about life and existentially and what happens when we die. Um, but the question kind of seems to come up that she asks, "How did I forget this?" Was it possible that she goes along living her life like all of us do, because it's so counterintuitive to deny the self? And actually, it's really impossible to live it out, anyways. She talks about there's no self, and then she gets into this idea that we're just atoms and matter. So at this point, one of the questions that I would ask this individual is, do you believe that there's such a thing as a soul? And if we're just atoms and matter, well, if the answer was, if she were to answer yes about the existence of a soul, then she would mean it was physical like in an Epicurean sense if everything is just atoms and matter. Think about the Apostle Paul at Mars Hill. He deals with Epicureans. Now, Epicurean philosophers like Lucretius, for instance, argued that souls are just made of atoms, just like everything else. And when you die, your atoms just are dispersed. So there seems to be a theme here there. Then she goes on to say that she was formed from a star and that she's just energy. Now, one of the questions I have is, she speaking about herself individually, or is she making a grand claim about all of humanity? Well, she says for myself when she starts this, but it's clear from the kind of the unspoken assumption is that this is for everybody. And, this idea that we're all just energy. Well, here we go. This is New Age spiritualism. And it's a pantheistic force that permeates everything. So this is pantheism and this is New Age spiritualism. As much as she is searching for this as if it's her own individual belief system that she's just having, is kind of revelatory to her as she lays dying. This is one of the things that New Age or even Wiccan religion, which isn't necessarily the same thing, but this idea of the old time religion, right? So this is not new, but this is old. She goes on to say that she feels like she's one with the ground and the earth. She says, I will be before me and after me. But I would pause for a second. I thought there was no self. Yet notice that she keeps using the word I over and over again. Well, I is in the context of self. So she's about to kind of go on and even get even deeper with this. Okay, but just to kind of set the stage here, she has said a lot of things here. She began with moral relativism, talked about materialism with atoms and matter, and now we're into New Age spiritualism with energy and things of that nature. Let's continue to listen.
Just by remembering, I'm returning home. It's like a drop of water falling back into the ocean, of which it's always been a part. All things, a part. All of us, a part. You, me, and my little girl, and my mother, and my father. Everyone who's ever been, every plant, every animal, every atom, every star, every galaxy, all of it. More galaxies in the universe than grains of sand on the beach, and that's what we're talking about when we say God. The One, the cosmos, and its infinite dreams. We are the cosmos dreaming of itself. It's simply a dream that I think is my life every time. But I'll forget this. I always do. I always forget my dreams. But now, in this split second, in the moment I remember, the instant I remember, I comprehend everything at once. There is no time. There is no death. Life is a dream. It's a wish. Made again and again and again and again and again and again and on into eternity. And I am all of it. I am everything. I am all. I am that I am.
Okay. So obviously, this was building, and she kind of makes a conclusion here. She talks about this idea of returning home. Immediately after that, she essentially says what Kansas said in the 1970s song Dust in the Wind. I'm just a drop of water in an endless sea. Now, if you listen to Dust in the Wind, if you know the song, if you don't, go look it up. It's kind of it's got a pretty guitar, finger picking in it and things like that. But it's kind of a pessimistic song. But here, this is almost an optimistic thing. She's laying there dying on the ground, and she talks about this idea that she's a drop of water in an endless sea. Now, this type of thinking began with the counterculture. Surprise, surprise. You know how much I'm into kind of analyzing the counterculture and the ramifications it's had for us today with our society. But here's yet another example. I'd highly recommend Peter Jones's book, The Other Worldview, where he talks about this idea in the 1960s. The hippies, as they were looking for the counterculture, and they're looking for information and thoughts concerning the greater truths of our universe and our world, they turned east to the Eastern worldviews, the Eastern religions. And he says that the hippies turned east and the gurus came west. So this was with the mystic and the gurus kind of came over to the United States, and so people like the Beatles, of course, go to India and these other places and claim to have these great enlightenment and this great enlightenment and all the rest of it. But it really deeply, profoundly impacted our culture. And Jones calls this one-ism. And it's this idea that the difference in worldview really boils down to, do you believe that all things are one, or do you believe that all things are two? And here's why this matters. If you believe all things are one, then there really is no distinction between creator and created. All is one. And distinctions, at the very least, are worthless. And at their worst, they are power moves by the entrenched power. I think we hear a little bit about that today. And certainly Friedrich Nietzsche talked about that, in terms of his moral relativism, that claims to truth were just a power grab. Inherent in what she's saying, too, is just the belief system of pantheism. All is God. God is the universe. And of course, not the personal, separate, and holy God of the Bible, but a God that is inseparable from his creation. In a sense, a God closer to the concept that a philosopher named Spinoza or even Albert Einstein believed in, at one with the universe. She says, we are God dreaming of himself. This is kind of a Hegelian concept of God revealing the world through himself. Okay, this idea that we are just God dreaming of himself. Reality and distinctions are actually illusions. Now, this is a clear connection to the Eastern worldview. And maybe there's a hint there of even some Native American beliefs. Not all Native American beliefs. And by the way, not when I say New Age and Eastern, there's a tremendous diversity of thought here. But there are some themes here that you can pick up. In some Native American beliefs, the dream world is actually more real than the real world. But this idea that the real world is an illusion, the distinctions, and your job is to get behind the illusion so you can really understand truth. And she says, I'll forget this. I always do. Which, if you were listening to this, you're probably asking, so you're remembering that you're always forgetting? And here we have a statement that is a perfect illustration of the incoherence of this worldview. Now, perhaps she means this is an eternal reoccurrence in that context. In other words, our lives are just the same things happening over and over again, down to its minute detail for all eternity. The Stoics believed, some of the Stoic philosophers certainly believed that your life would be repeated over and over again, down to its minute detail. It clearly a conception of reincarnation here. So the universe kind of explodes back into itself and everything is repeated over and over again. Again, our friend Friedrich Nietzsche believed a very similar thing. And she ends here by saying, I am everything. I am God. I am that I am. Wow. And this is clearly New Age spiritualism. Shirley MacLaine would certainly be proud of that statement. Notice there is this I again, though. Despite her insistence, there is no self. How many times does she say I, right? Now, what causes people to kind of go down this road? Well, certainly I think one of the things is as you contemplate the universe, And many have done this and looked at the stars and the heavens, and this feeling of insignificance as you consider the vastness of a cold, impersonal, vast universe. Now, I guess for some people, what she just kind of explained is somehow more comforting than the idea of a personal creator that we are accountable to. There's certainly no accountability here because everything's an illusion. We're all God, everything's one. So you're not accountable to anything. It's just you, God revealing himself through everything. And, everything will be okay if we are, in fact, God. It deifies us, right? Yeah, what's interesting about this show and about this speech is it doesn't address the evil that the characters have been fighting all episode. And here's where the spoiler alert comes in. In a brilliant move by the director, actually, there's a word that is not used in the entire show that the whole show is basically essentially about. And it's a show about a vampire called the Angel of the Lord. And most of the show is about stopping the evil vampire that just ripped her throat out. Actually, it takes a while to get there. It's not really until the last 2 episodes, 3 episodes maybe, that you really figure this out. But you see, in this worldview, there is no right and wrong. There is just a cosmic coma to make sense of it all. There's no ultimate purpose. It's just a cycle of repeating lifespans that have no ultimate purpose. As a matter of fact, according to this worldview, the vampire and the evil characters in the show that supported the vampire are just God as well, right? All is one. No better, no worse, no different. You see, this is a classic sense of a cosmic, I want my cake and eat it too. And it's an example of our culture's insistence that religious belief should be anything but the Judeo Christian belief, even if it is contradictory and incoherent. Most of the episodes were spent focusing on this new priest calling his people to a deeper faith and an acceptance of the supernatural that God was capable of. But by the end of the episode, of course, you see the priest just rip off his religious collar like everyone else and just be part of the Eastern Hindu overtones that you see throughout the show. Really, when you look at the belief system of Hinduism, it's essentially what she says with some, again, some New Age spiritualism mixed in there, but it's largely Hindu. And for much of the show, there's a Muslim character who's the sheriff, and he's worried and frustrated over the fact that his son is actually going to the Catholic Church, and he's upset about what's happening there. But by the end of the show, of course, he's relegated to the overall theme of cosmic oneness as well. And the sad irony here, as you probably heard in the clip, is the Christian song "Were You There" is playing ever so faintly in the background throughout the whole speech. Well, folks, this is a perfect example of religious tossed salad in an individualistic, consumeristic American mindset. We can put anything together in this religious bowl that we choose. Because, hey, if we're God, we piece it all together anyways, don't we? It was Chesterton, G.K. Chesterton, who said something about atheists. He said something like, it's not that you don't believe anything when you're an atheist or that you believe nothing. It's now that the fact is that you will believe everything. And one of the things that, of course, is missing here is the Christian belief, the biblical understanding that the creator is distinct from his creation. He is holy and separate. Genesis is clear that in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, that man was formed out of the dust. Not the same as God, but different from God and lesser than God. Isaiah 55:8 talks about the difference as well, where it says, "My thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord." In one of my favorite verses in Romans, the first chapter, chapter 12, where it talks about the idea of having the importance of having a renewed mind. And it stands in contrast to Romans 1, where it talks about God giving over people to a debased mind because of their rebellion, suppressing the truth in their unrighteousness. The debased mind of Romans 1 says that God is the same as us, that all is divine. The renewed mind says that God is the divine other and that we are created. The debased mind says we should worship nature and ourselves. The renewed mind says we worship the Creator and celebrate God's otherness. The debased mind says in sexuality we should celebrate sameness. The renewed mind says we celebrate the God-inspired union that includes difference. In the debased mind, God is impersonal and is dependent upon creation. In the renewed mind, God is personal, not contingent, and fully relational in his triunity. In the debased mind, we have a cyclical view of history. In the renewed mind, we have a linear view of history. The debased mind embraces moral relativism. The renewed mind embraces the truth that we are fallen and in need of a Savior and in need of redemption. The debased mind says that we are ignorant of our divinity. Well, in the renewed mind, we understand through our fallenness that we are anything but divine. In the debased mind, we talk about meditating on our divine self. In the renewed mind, we understand the importance of communing with the holy, righteous, merciful, and just God. And Scripture clearly says, just as man is appointed to die once, and after that to face the judgment, so also Christ was offered once to bear the sins of many, and he will appear a second time, not to bear sin, but to bring salvation to those who eagerly await him. So as we close, rather than waiting for an eternal reoccurrence of a fallen existence, our true and living God offers us so much more than what is offered here. And as you think of this story and you see how it culminates and the message that resonates with the people that watch this, it's so important to talk to people about the difference. Well, that's all we have time for today. But remember that all truth is God's truth. And if Jesus is who he says he is, that changes everything. We hope you enjoyed being with us today. Join us each week for In But Not Of, a podcast dedicated to applying a Christian worldview to the study of history and culture.